Hey Guy, before we begin, if you enjoy gentle journeys through history, subscribe to a new story whenever you need to unwind. And if you'd like, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Different cities, different time zones. I love to imagine all of us, scattered across the world, sharing this peaceful moment. Now gently turn off the lights, sit back, let the day drift by. And together, let's turn back time. If the light was still thin and the air had not yet warmed, the movement of the column would already be underway. The soldiers stepped forward in a steady rhythm, not fast and not slow, as if the pace had been set long before that morning. The ground held the coolness of the night, and each step landed without much resistance. The beginning of the day did not feel sudden. It unfolded gradually with the sound of many feet moving together. The early hours were chosen for a simple reason. The air was easier to move through before the sun rose higher. There was less heat pressing down, and the body could settle into motion without strain. Breath stayed even, and the weight on the shoulders felt more balanced in the cool air. The march began quietly, without any strong signal, just a continuation of what had been done many times before. The line of soldiers stretched forward in an organized form, each person maintaining distance without needing to look closely. Movement was guided by habit, not by constant instruction. The ground could be dirt, small stones, or worn paths, but the pace remained the same. Feet touched the surface in a repeated pattern that did not change much from step to step. There was no pause to observe the surroundings in detail. The attention stayed on keeping the rhythm. The body adjusted to the ground without much thought, shifting weight slightly with each contact. Small changes in terrain were absorbed into the movement. The march did not require sudden decisions. It continued as a steady process. It is notable how something as simple as walking at dawn could be treated as a fixed routine rather than a choice. As the light increased, the shapes of the road became clearer, and the surface showed more detail. Small stones appeared more sharply, and uneven patches could be seen ahead. The feet continued to meet the ground directly, with little separation between skin and surface. The sensation was not described or discussed. It remained part of the process. Some soldiers wore caligae, with their thick soles and open design, but these did not fully isolate the foot from the ground. In certain conditions, the straps loosened or the soles wore thin. There were moments when the protection was minimal and the contact with the surface became more direct. Even then, the pace did not change. Others moved with very little covering on their feet, either by circumstance or by wear over time. The difference in footwear did not create a visible break in the formation. Everyone moved within the same rhythm, and the line remained intact. The focus stayed on maintaining distance and pace, not on individual comfort. The ground itself influenced each step, but not in a way that stopped the movement. Dirt compressed under the weight, while small stones shifted slightly. Harder surfaces returned the pressure into the foot. Each type of ground created a different sensation, yet all were absorbed into the same repeated motion. In a modern setting, even a short walk is often adjusted for comfort, with surfaces chosen and footwear designed to reduce contact. As the sun rose further, the temperature began to change, and the surface of the road slowly warmed. The early coolness faded, replaced by a more constant heat. The body adjusted without any clear signal, continuing forward as before. The rhythm remained steady, unchanged by the shift in conditions. The weight carried by each soldier added to the pressure on the feet. Weapons, tools, and personal items were distributed across the body, but the final contact point remained the ground. Each step transferred that weight downward. The repetition of this movement created a pattern that did not break. There were no extended pauses built into the early part of the march. Short moments of slowing could occur, but the column did not fully stop. The idea of rest was not part of this initial phase. Movement defined the beginning of the day, and it continued without interruption. The sounds of the march formed a consistent background, a mixture of footsteps and light contact with equipment. There was no need for conversation to maintain the pace. The rhythm of movement provided enough structure. Each person followed the same pattern, step after step. From a distance, the march appears less like a series of individual actions and more like a single continuous motion. As time passed, the body settled more deeply into the rhythm, and the awareness of each step became less distinct. The ground was still present, but it required less attention. Small discomforts did not interrupt the movement. The repetition created a kind of familiarity that reduced the need to react. New soldiers noticed the difference more clearly in these early hours. The contact with the ground felt more direct, and each step required more attention. The pace could feel steady but demanding. Over time, this awareness would change, but at the beginning, it remained noticeable. Experienced soldiers moved with less visible adjustment, their steps appearing more even. The ground did not seem to alter their rhythm as much. The body had already adapted to the repeated contact. What once required attention had become part of a routine. The march continued forward without a defined endpoint in sight. The focus stayed on the next step rather than the total distance. The line maintained its shape, and the spacing remained consistent. The process of moving forward did not depend on knowing where it would end. The morning march carried on in a quiet pattern, with the ground, the weight, and the rhythm all blending into a single experience. The same steps would continue as the day changed, without much variation in pace or form. And as the hours passed, the condition of the feet would begin to show small signs that were not always immediately visible. The march continued under the same steady rhythm, with the line of soldiers maintaining its form as the day unfolded. Footwear, when present, varied in condition and structure, and it did not always provide full separation from the ground. Some sandals were worn thin from repeated use, while others had straps that no longer held tightly. The difference between having footwear and lacking it was not always clear at a glance. Caligae were common among Roman soldiers, designed with thick soles and open spaces between straps. These sandals allowed air to pass through, reducing heat build-up during long marches. At the same time, the open design left parts of the foot exposed to dust and small debris. Over time, the soles could wear down, making the ground more noticeable with each step. In certain conditions, the straps could loosen or break, especially after extended movement over uneven terrain. Repairs were not always immediate, and some soldiers continued without fully secured footwear. The structure of the sandal depended on materials that did not always last through continuous use. As a result, the level of protection changed gradually rather than all at once. Not every soldier had access to well-maintained footwear at all times. Supply conditions, distance from base, and previous wear all affected what was available. Some moved with sandals that had been repaired multiple times, while others had pieces missing. The line of soldiers still moved as one, without pausing to adjust for these differences. It is interesting how something designed for protection could slowly become less reliable without drawing much attention. As the march progressed, the contact between foot and ground varied from person to person. Some felt a thicker layer between them and the surface, while others experienced a more direct connection. The difference did not change the rhythm of the march, only the internal experience of each step. The formation remained consistent despite these variations. Dust gathered quickly around the feet, especially on dry paths, settling into the spaces between straps or directly onto the skin. Small particles moved with each step, creating a subtle shift in texture. The presence of dust did not interrupt movement. It simply became part of the environment. Over time, the accumulation blended into the routine of marching, on harder surfaces, such as stone roads. The pressure returned more directly through the sole of the sandal or the foot itself. The repeated contact created a consistent pattern of sensation. There was no single moment when this became noticeable. It developed gradually through repetition. The body adjusted without any clear pause in movement. Some soldiers shifted their weight slightly to account for uneven footwear. Though these changes were small and did not disrupt the line, the adjustments were subtle, often unnoticed by others. movement remained synchronized across the group. The overall pace continued without interruption. In a modern setting, footwear is often replaced at the first sign of wear, while here it continued to be used as long as it remained functional in any form. The structure of caligae allowed for flexibility, but it did not fully shield the foot from changes in temperature. As the ground warmed, heat could pass through thinner sections of the sole or exposed areas. The sensation varied depending on the condition of the sandal. Even so, the march did not slow in response. Where sandals were absent or reduced to minimal covering, the ground was felt more directly. The surface texture, whether smooth or rough, became part of each step. This contact did not create visible breaks in formation. The movement of the group continued as before. Over time, the distinction between different levels of footwear became less noticeable from the outside. The line of soldiers appeared uniform in motion, regardless of what they wore. Differences existed at the level of individual experience rather than in visible behaviour. The march presented a consistent image. There was no extended period set aside to address the condition of footwear during movement. Adjustments were made when possible, but not at the cost of stopping the column. The priority remained on maintaining pace. Any changes were absorbed into the flow of the march. The variation in footwear did not seem to define the movement as much as the shared rhythm did. As the day continued, the repeated contact between foot and ground contributed to gradual changes in both. Soles became thinner, and exposed skin adapted to the surface. These changes occurred slowly, without drawing attention at any single moment. The process was continuous rather than sudden. New soldiers were more aware of these differences, noticing the condition of their footwear early in the march. The contrast between expectation and experience was clearer at the beginning. Over time, this awareness often became less immediate. The focus shifted toward maintaining pace rather than evaluating comfort. Experienced soldiers moved with less visible concern about the condition of their sandals. The state of their footwear did not appear to alter their rhythm significantly. Their steps remained even, regardless of the surface. The movement had become consistent through repetition. The march extended forward without a clear endpoint in view, and the condition of footwear became one of many factors absorbed into the routine. The line held its structure, and the spacing remained stable. Movement continued as a steady progression. The day advanced without a change in pace. The march carried on with worn sandals, loose straps, and sometimes bare feet, all moving within the same steady pattern. The difference between protection and direct contact remained present, but did not interrupt the flow, and in the next stretch, the ground itself would begin to define the experience more clearly, with its uneven surfaces and shifting textures underfoot. The surface beneath the soldiers' feet was never entirely uniform, and it changed gradually as the march continued. At times, the ground was packed dirt, pressed down by repeated movement over many days. In other areas, small stones appeared scattered across the path, shifting slightly under each step. The variation did not interrupt the rhythm, it simply altered the sensation that accompanied each movement. What looked simple from a distance felt different with every stretch of road. On dirt paths, the foot met a surface that could compress slightly under pressure. This created a softer contact, though not enough to remove the feeling of weight. Each step left a faint impression, quickly erased by the next person passing over it. The ground responded briefly, then returned to its previous state. The softness was limited, and the body still felt the firmness underneath. Where stones were more common, the experience changed in a subtle but consistent way. Small, uneven edges pressed against the foot, creating points of contact that varied with each step. These stones did not remain fixed, often shifting just enough to change their position. The body adjusted automatically, redistributing weight without pause. That constant adjustment became part of the movement itself. The Roman roads, when present, introduced a different kind of surface. These roads were constructed from layered materials, often topped with large, flat stones. While they appeared stable from a distance, their surfaces were not perfectly even. Slight rises and gaps between stones created a pattern that the feet had to navigate. Order existed in the road, but not softness. It is notable how a road designed for efficiency did not always offer a smooth surface for those who walked upon it. As the march continued, transitions between different types of ground occurred without warning. A dirt path could give way to stone, and then return to loose soil. These changes required no discussion or adjustment in pace. The movement absorbed them as part of its ongoing rhythm. The body learned the change only when the foot was already on it. On uneven ground, the foot rarely landed flat. Instead, it made contact at different angles, depending on the shape of the surface. This created a shifting pattern of pressure that changed from step to step. The body responded with small corrections that became less noticeable over time. Ankles, knees, and hips all took part in these quiet adjustments. Dust was present in many areas, especially where the ground was dry. It settled lightly on the surface, forming a thin layer that moved with each step. This layer could soften the initial contact, though it did not remove the underlying texture. The presence of dust became a constant, blending into the environment. It also gathered on the feet and between the straps of sandals without much notice. In areas where the ground had been disturbed by previous movement, small depressions formed. These shallow marks altered the level of the surface, creating slight variations in height. Each step encountered a different position, requiring subtle balance. The adjustments remained small and continuous. Even a familiar path could feel slightly different by the end of the day. In a modern setting, walking surfaces are often designed to be even and predictable, reducing the need for constant adjustment. The temperature of the ground also played a role in shaping the experience. In the early hours, the surface retained the coolness of the night. As the day progressed, it absorbed heat from the sun, gradually becoming warmer. This change was steady and did not occur all at once. A road that felt mild at dawn could feel much harder by midday. On exposed stone roads, heat accumulated more quickly. The surface held warmth longer than dirt, creating a consistent temperature underfoot. The difference between shaded and open areas could be felt without needing to look. These variations became part of the ongoing experience. The ground did not need to be extreme to become noticeable. Loose stones introduced another layer of variation. When stepped on, they could shift slightly, altering the stability of each step. This movement required the body to adjust balance in a small but continuous way. The response was automatic and did not interrupt the pace. A soldier did not need to stop to feel that change. The edges of stones, though not sharp enough to stop movement, created points of concentrated pressure. These points changed location with each step, preventing any single area from carrying all the weight. Over time, the distribution of pressure became more even. The body adapted to these patterns without direct attention. Repetition made the roughness less surprising, though not absent. The ground did not remain constant, yet the movement over it stayed almost unchanged. New soldiers often noticed these variations more clearly in the beginning. Each change in surface required more attention, and the sensation of uneven ground was more distinct. The need to adjust felt more immediate. Over time, this awareness often became less pronounced. What first felt distracting later became ordinary. Experienced soldiers moved with a steadier pattern, showing fewer visible adjustments. Their steps appeared more even, despite the changing terrain. The body had learned to respond without delay. What once required attention had become part of a routine. Experience did not flatten the road, it only changed the reaction to it. The line of soldiers continued forward, maintaining its structure across all types of ground. The spacing between individuals remained consistent, and the rhythm did not shift. The terrain influenced the experience, but not the visible form of the march. Movement remained continuous. The shape of the column stayed more stable than the surface below it. There was no single type of surface that defined the entire journey. Instead, The march consisted of a sequence of changing conditions. Each new section of ground introduced slight differences, which were absorbed into the overall pattern. The experience was shaped by variation rather than uniformity. What the feet met was always changing, even when the pace was not. In wet areas, the ground behaved differently again. Dirt could soften and cling, adding a slight pull to each step. Stone could become slick, changing the kind of caution required without forcing the line to stop. The soldiers continued through these sections much as they did through dry ones. The road did not need to be dramatic to make the day feel longer on foot. By the end of a long stretch, the memory of the ground remained in the body more than in the mind. Pressure lingered in the soles, and the legs held the record of repeated adjustment. The road was left behind physically, but not entirely in sensation. Even after stopping, the pattern of contact seemed to remain for a while. The body carried the surface forward in a quiet way. The ground, in all its changing forms, became a quiet influence on each step, present but rarely acknowledged. The march continued across dirt, stone, dust, heat, and uneven paths without altering its steady pace. And as the days went on, that repeated contact would begin to harden the feet themselves, until the body answered the road by changing its own surface. The repeated contact between foot and ground did not remain the same over many days of marching. What was first noticed as a clear sensation gradually became less distinct. The surface still pressed upward with each step, but the reaction to it began to change. The body did not remove the pressure, it adjusted to it slowly. This change happened without a clear moment when it could be observed directly. At the beginning, each step could feel separate from the one before it. Small stones, rough edges, and warm ground created a noticeable pattern underfoot. These details did not stop movement, but they stayed present in awareness. The feet reacted more quickly to changes in the surface. Over time, this sharp awareness began to soften. The skin on the feet responded first to the repeated use. Areas that carried the most weight began to thicken gradually. This change did not appear all at once, and it did not require attention. It developed over many hours of walking. The surface of the skin became less responsive to small changes. As the skin thickened, contact with the ground became more even. Pressure no longer gathered in a single point as often as before. Instead, it spread across a wider area of the foot. This made each step feel more stable. The body required fewer corrections to maintain balance. It is notable how the same ground that once caused reaction slowly became something the body accepted without comment. Blisters could still appear during the early days of repeated marching. These formed where friction remained consistent and strong. They did not always stop movement, and often remained part of the experience. Over time, the frequency of these changes decreased. The skin adjusted to the repeated motion. Dry areas and small cracks could develop as the surface of the foot changed. These did not receive special attention during the march. The movement continued in the same steady rhythm. The condition of the skin reflected more use than care. The feet remained in contact with the ground regardless of these changes. The way the foot met the ground also became more consistent. Instead of reacting to each uneven surface, it followed a more stable pattern. Weight shifted in a controlled manner from heel to front. This reduced sudden movements. The step became more even over time. The muscles of the foot and lower leg adapted as well. Small adjustments became smoother and required less effort. Balance was maintained with less visible change. The body learned to respond without delay. These changes were not sudden, but they accumulated through repetition. In a modern setting, discomfort in the feet often leads to rest or better protection, while here the body continued and adjusted instead. As the march continued, awareness of the ground moved further into the background. The surface was still present, but it required less attention. Each step followed the same pattern without interruption. The rhythm of movement became more stable. What remained was familiarity rather than comfort. Experienced soldiers showed fewer visible reactions to uneven ground. Their steps appeared steady even when the surface changed. The body had incorporated these variations into its movement. There was no need to pause or adjust in a noticeable way. The march continued as before. New soldiers noticed the difference more clearly. Each step required more attention in the beginning. The ground felt more direct and less predictable. Over time, this awareness began to decrease. The same process of adaptation took place gradually. The formation of the group did not reflect these individual differences. The line remained steady and evenly spaced. Movement continued without visible disruption. The internal experience varied, but the outward pattern stayed the same. The march appeared uniform from a distance. The change in the feet was not something that could be seen easily, but it shaped how the march was carried forward. The distribution of weight became more even across the foot. Pressure is no longer concentrated in a few points as strongly. This reduced the need for sudden correction. The body maintained balance more easily. Each step became part of a consistent pattern. The boundary between discomfort and routine became less clear. Sensations that once required attention became part of the background. The body continued without reacting to each detail. Movement remained steady. The march did not slow because of these changes. There was no clear point where the feet were considered fully adapted. The process continued as long as the marching did. Each day added to the same gradual change. The body did not reach a final state. It remained in adjustment. The result was a more stable movement over time. The ground continued to vary in surface and temperature. Dirt, stone, and dust all remained part of the journey. These differences did not disappear. The response to them simply became more consistent. The body carried on without interruption. By the end of a long marches, the feet reflected the repeated contact. The surface of the skin had changed, and the pattern of movement had settled. These were not sudden or dramatic changes. They developed through repetition. The result was a more stable interaction with the ground. The feet became less reactive to the surface, not because the ground changed, but because the body adjusted to it over time. The same steps continued across different terrain without altering the rhythm, and as the march went on, even the sandals meant to protect them would begin to wear down, changing how much of the ground could be felt again. The sandals worn by Roman soldiers were designed for movement rather than full protection. Caligae had thick soles and open straps that allowed air to pass through. This made them suitable for long marches in warm conditions. At the same time, the design left parts of the foot exposed to the ground. The balance between durability and exposure was always present. At first, the structure of the sandal created a layer between the foot and the surface. The sole absorbed some of the pressure from stones and uneven ground. This reduced the sharpness of contact in certain areas. However, the protection was not complete. Small details of the surface could still be felt through it. Over time, the soles began to wear down from repeated use. Each step pressed the material against dirt, stone, and dust. The edges became thinner, and the surface lost some of its original shape. This process was gradual and not always noticed immediately. The sandal changed slowly as the march continued. The straps also showed signs of use. Leather could stretch, loosen, or shift slightly with movement. This affected how the sandal held the foot in place. A less secure fit changed the way weight was distributed. The difference remained small but consistent. It is notable how something meant to protect the foot could slowly become closer to the ground it was meant to separate. As the condition of the sandals changed, the contact with the ground became more direct. Pressure passed through the thinner sections of the sole more easily. The surface underneath became more noticeable again. This did not interrupt the march, but it altered the experience of each step. In some cases, parts of the sandal could break or wear away completely. A missing strap or weakened sole reduced the effectiveness of the design. Repairs were not always immediate, especially during continuous movement. Soldiers often continued with what remained. The line did not stop for individual adjustments. The open design of caligae allowed dust and small particles to enter easily. These are settled between the foot and the sole. With each step, the particles shifted slightly. This created a changing texture that remained present throughout the march. The sandal did not prevent this interaction. On rough surfaces, the remaining sole still offered some separation. Larger stones were less sharply felt than they would be without any covering. At the same time, smaller irregularities passed through more easily. The level of protection depended on the condition of the sandal. It was not fixed. In a modern setting, damaged footwear is often replaced quickly, while here it continued to be used as long as it could still function in any form. The connection between the foot and the sandal also changed over time. As the straps loosened, the foot could shift slightly within the structure. This created a different pattern of contact. The movement remained controlled, but less fixed. Each step included a small adjustment. Where sandals became very thin, the difference between wearing them and going without became less distinct. The ground could be felt through the remaining material. The sole no longer absorbed as much pressure. The experience moved closer to direct contact. The transition happened gradually. Not every soldier experienced this change in the same way. Some had sandals in better condition, while others had more worn pairs. The variation did not affect the overall formation. The line continued to move as one. Differences remained at the level of individual experience. There was no clear moment when a sandal was considered no longer usable. As long as it remained attached and allowed movement, it continued to be worn. The threshold for replacement was not immediate. Function mattered more than condition. The march continued without pause. The presence of sandals did not fully define how the ground was experienced, especially as they changed with use. As the day progressed, the heat affected both the ground and the sandals themselves. The material of the sole warmed along with the surface beneath it. This reduced any cooling effect that might have been present earlier. The difference between covered and uncovered areas became less clear. The foot adjusted to this change without stopping. Moisture from sweat also influenced the contact between the foot and the sandal. The inner surface became slightly damp, changing how the foot rested within it. This did not interrupt movement, but it altered the feeling of each step. The change remained subtle and continuous. Experienced soldiers seemed less affected by the condition of their sandals. Their steps remained steady regardless of how worn the material had become. The body had already adapted to different levels of contact. The sandal became one part of a larger pattern. Movement stayed consistent. New soldiers noticed the condition of their footwear more clearly. Changes in fit or thickness were more noticeable at the beginning. The difference between expectation and experience was still present. Over time, this awareness often decreased. The process of adaptation continued. The march did not adjust to match the condition of the sandals. Instead, the sandals adjusted to the demands of the march. Each step contributed to their gradual wear. The structure changed in response to repeated use. The movement remained unchanged. By the end of extended use, some sandals no longer provided the same level of separation from the ground. The foot felt more of the surface beneath it. The original design still existed, but in a reduced form. The difference was clear in experience, though not always in appearance. The march continued forward. The sandals, worn down by constant movement, became less of a barrier and more of a thin layer between foot and ground. The rhythm of the march remained steady, even as the protection slowly reduced, and in the next stage, the act of marching itself would stand out more clearly as a daily routine that repeated without much variation. The act of marching was not treated as something unusual within the life of a Roman soldier. It formed a regular part of each day, repeating with little variation from one morning to the next. The body moved forward not as a response to a special event, but as part of an expected pattern. This repetition shaped how the experience was understood. The march did not stand out. It blended into the structure of daily activity. The beginning of the movement followed a familiar sequence. The line formed, Spacing was maintained, and the pace settled quickly into a steady rhythm. There was no need for extended preparation once the routine was established. Each soldier knew where to stand and how to move. The process unfolded with minimal adjustment. Over time, the predictability of the march reduced the need for attention to each step. The body followed a pattern that had been repeated many times before. Small variations in ground or condition did not interrupt this flow. Movement became continuous rather than reactive. The rhythm carried the body forward. The length of the march could vary, but the structure remained similar. Periods of movement extended across the day, broken only by short pauses. These pauses were brief and did not change the overall pattern. The expectation remained that movement would resume shortly. The routine continued without disruption. It is notable how an activity that required constant physical effort could still be treated as an ordinary part of the day. As the routine became more familiar, the sense of progression changed. The focus shifted away from distance and toward maintaining rhythm. Each step connected to the next without drawing attention to how far had been travelled. The march was experienced as a sequence rather than a total. The day unfolded through movement. The body adjusted to this repetition by reducing unnecessary variation. Movements became more efficient and required less visible effort. Energy was distributed more evenly across time. The result was a steady pace that could be maintained for long periods. The rhythm supported the continuation of motion. There was little distinction between one day of marching and the next. The same actions were repeated under similar conditions. Differences in terrain or weather did not alter the structure of the routine. The march remained consistent in form. Time passed within this repeated pattern. The group moved as a unit, with each person maintaining position relative to others. This consistency reduced the need for individual decisions. The rhythm of the group guided the movement. The line remained stable as it advanced. The routine supported this coordination. In a modern setting, repetitive physical activity is often varied or limited, while here it continued in the same form day after day. As familiarity increased, the mental effort required to maintain the march decreased. Attention did not need to focus on each detail of movement. The body followed established patterns without interruption. This allowed the rhythm to continue with less conscious involvement. The march became more automatic. New soldiers experienced the routine differently in the early stages. The repetition was more noticeable, and each day felt distinct. They were more aware of time passing and distance covered. Over time, this distinction often faded. The routine became more familiar and less defined by individual days. Experienced soldiers moved within the routine with less visible effort. Their steps appeared even and consistent across different conditions. The structure of the march had been internalized. Movement required fewer adjustments. The rhythm remained steady. The routine did not eliminate variation in conditions, but it reduced the impact of those variations. Changes in ground, temperature, or load were absorbed into the same pattern of movement. The body responded without interrupting the rhythm. The march continued forward. The repetition of marching shaped not only the body, but also how the experience was perceived over time. Short pauses during the day did not break the structure of the routine. They served only as brief interruptions before movement resumed. The expectation of continuation remained constant. The body is prepared to move again even while at rest. The rhythm extended beyond the act of walking itself. The sequence of movement and pause formed a cycle that repeated across the day. Each cycle resembled the one before it. There was no need to redefine the pattern each time. The routine remained stable. The march continued within this cycle. The connection between routine and movement became stronger with time. The body anticipated the continuation of the march without needing to be directed. This anticipation reduced hesitation. Each step followed naturally from the previous one. The pattern remained uninterrupted. The march did not depend on variation to continue. Instead, it relied on consistency. The same actions were repeated in the same order. This repetition allowed movement to extend over long periods. The routine supported endurance. By the end of many days, the act of marching no longer stood out as a separate activity. It became part of the general experience of being a soldier. The body and the routine aligned. Movement was expected and continuous. The march remained steady. The sense of time also changed within this repetition. Hours passed without clear separation, marked only by the continuation of steps. The beginning and middle of the day felt similar in structure. The routine shaped how time was experienced. Movement defined the day more than any specific moment. The march moved forward as part of a daily pattern, repeating with little change from one day to the next. The rhythm of movement remained consistent, supported by routine rather than variation. And as this pattern continued, the attention given to discomfort would begin to fade further, with less notice given to what was felt underfoot. The presence of discomfort during long marches did not stand apart from the act of walking itself. It existed within each step, but it was not often treated as something separate. The body continued forward while carrying these sensations without pause. There was no visible change in rhythm when discomfort appeared. The march remained steady from one moment to the next. In the early stages, each step could feel more distinct to a new soldier. The ground pressed upward, and the body reacted more clearly to each change. Small stones, rough patches, and heat created noticeable differences underfoot. These sensations did not interrupt movement, but they stayed present. The feet had not yet adjusted to repeated contact. The structure of marching allowed little space for focusing on what was felt. Movement depended on maintaining pace with the group. Slowing or stopping was not part of the usual pattern during the march. Because of this, sensations were carried forward rather than examined. The body adapted while continuing to move. Discomfort did not always appear as a sudden or sharp feeling. It often remained as a steady presence that stayed in the background. The ground, weight, and duration all contributed to it. None of these factors was removed during movement. The body continued without outward reaction. It is notable how something present in nearly every step could remain largely unspoken within the routine of marching. As time passed, the distinction between stronger and lighter discomfort became less clear. What had once stood out began to blend into the general pattern of movement. The body adjusted its response even when the surface did not change. Sensation remained, but it required less attention. The march shaped what was noticed. There was no specific time set aside to observe or describe what was being felt. The routine focused on continuation rather than reflection. Each step followed the next without interruption. The body responded internally while the outward movement stayed the same. The rhythm remained unchanged. Within the group, movement stayed synchronized. Each soldier held position and pace regardless of internal experience. Discomfort did not create visible differences between individuals. The line continued forward as one. The shared rhythm covered individual variation. Repetition changed how sensation was experienced over time. What began as a clear signal became less distinct. The body reduced its reaction to small changes in surface and pressure. The pattern of marching shaped the response. Movement continued without adjustment. In a modern setting, discomfort is often managed or reduced, while here it remained part of the activity without direct response. New soldiers were more aware of discomfort in the beginning. Each step required more attention, and the ground felt more immediate. The weight of movement was more noticeable throughout the body. Over time, this awareness decreased. The same routine reduced its intensity. Experienced soldiers moved with fewer visible reactions. Their steps remained even across different surfaces and conditions. The body had adapted to the repeated pattern of marching. Sensation did not disappear, but it required less attention. The march continued without change. There was no clear separation between comfort and discomfort within the routine. Both existed within the same pattern of movement. The body carried forward without marking a difference. The rhythm stayed consistent. The march did not pause to evaluate sensation. The absence of visible reaction did not mean the absence of feeling. It showed that sensation had been absorbed into the routine. The body adjusted internally while maintaining outward consistency. The line appeared unchanged from a distance. Movement remained steady. The lack of discussion did not remove discomfort, but it reduced its influence on how the march appeared from the outside. As the day progressed, the accumulation of movement added to what the body carried. Sensations built gradually rather than appearing suddenly. The feet and legs held the record of earlier steps. There was no clear reset during the day. Movement continued in the same pattern. Short pauses did not remove what had been felt. They provided brief relief, but the rhythm resumed soon after. The body returned to the same pattern of motion. Sensation continued from where it had paused. The march did not begin again. It simply continued. The environment influenced sensation without changing the structure of movement. Heat made the ground more noticeable, while stone changed how pressure was distributed. Dust altered the surface without removing contact. These changes did not alter the pace. The body responded internally. Over time, the relationship between sensation and movement became more stable. The body carried discomfort as part of the routine rather than as something separate. The difference between noticing and not noticing became less clear. Movement continued without interruption. The pattern remained consistent. By the end of repeated marches, discomfort was no longer a defining feature of the experience. It remained present, but less central to awareness. The body had adjusted to carry it within the rhythm. The march stayed unchanged. Movement continued forward. The routine itself shaped how discomfort was experienced. Repetition reduced how strongly it was noticed. The body learned to move without reacting outwardly. The line advanced in the same pattern as before. The experience became more even over time. The march continued with discomfort, present but rarely given attention, carried quietly within each step as part of the routine. The rhythm remained steady, and the body moved forward without altering its pace or structure. And as this continued, the weight each soldier carried would begin to press more clearly into the feet, adding a heavier layer to every step. The weight carried by Roman soldiers was a constant presence throughout the march. It did not change from step to step, but it influenced every movement. Weapons, tools, and personal items were distributed across the body. This added a steady downward pressure that met the ground through the feet. The march continued under this load without visible adjustment. At the beginning of the movement, the weight could feel more noticeable. The body had not yet settled into its rhythm. Each step carried both the mass of the soldier and the additional load. The contact with the ground became more defined under this pressure. Over time, the sensation blended into the pattern of marching. The distribution of weight across the body affected how the feet met the ground. The load carried on the shoulders and back shifted slightly with movement. This created small changes in balance with each step. The body responded through minor adjustments that became less visible over time. Movement remained steady. The connection between weight and ground contact was direct. Each step transferred the load downward through the legs into the feet. The surface responded with equal resistance. This interaction did not change the pace of the march. It remained consistent throughout the day. It is notable how the added weight did not slow the rhythm, but quietly increased the pressure within each step. As the march continued, the body adjusted to carrying this load. Muscles adapted to support the additional mass over long periods. Balance became more stable despite the shifting distribution of weight. The feet met the ground in a more controlled way. The rhythm remained unchanged. The sensation of weight did not disappear, but it became less distinct. It remained present without drawing attention to itself. Each step carried the same load as the one before it. The repetition reduced the need to react to it. Movement continued without interruption. Different surfaces influenced how the weight was felt underfoot. On softer ground, the pressure spread slightly. On harder surfaces, it returned more directly through the foot. These differences did not alter the pace. The body adjusted internally. Loose stones created small shifts under the added weight. The foot had to stabilize quickly to maintain balance. These adjustments were small and continuous. The movement remained even despite these variations. The line continued forward. In a modern setting, carrying heavy weights often leads to shorter distances or more rest, while here it remained part of continuous movement. The load carried by each soldier was not always identical. Some carried slightly more or less depending on equipment and role. These differences did not change the formation. The line remained consistent in its spacing and rhythm. Movement continued as a unified pattern. The straps and placement of equipment influenced how the weight was distributed. A shift in position could change how pressure was felt through the body. These changes were subtle and often adjusted during movement. The march did not pause for major corrections. The body adapted as it moved. Over time, the combined effect of weight and repetition shaped how the feet responded to the ground. Pressure became more evenly distributed. Sudden shifts in balance became less common. The body learned to carry the load with less visible effort. The rhythm stayed steady. New soldiers were more aware of the weight during early marches. Each step required more attention to balance and movement. The load felt more present in the body. Over time, this awareness decreased. The routine reduced its impact. The weight did not change the structure of the march, but it shaped how each step was experienced. Experienced soldiers moved with greater stability under the same load. Their steps appeared even across different surfaces. The body had adapted to carry weight without disrupting movement. The difference was visible in the consistency of their pace. The march remained unchanged. The connection between load and ground contact became more stable over time. The body transferred weight in a controlled pattern. Each step followed the same structure. The feet met the ground without sudden variation. Movement continued smoothly. The length of the march did not reduce the presence of weight. Instead, it extended the duration over which it was carried. The body responded by maintaining a steady rhythm. There was no clear point where the load became separate from movement. It remained part of each step. Short pauses did not remove the effect of weight entirely. They provided brief relief, but the load returned as movement resumed. The body adjusted again without delay. The rhythm continued from where it had paused. The march remained consistent. The environment influenced how the weight was felt without changing its amount. Heat, terrain, and surface conditions all interacted with the load. These factors altered sensation but not structure. The body adapted internally. The line moved forward. Over time, the presence of weight became part of the routine of marching. It no longer stood out as a separate element. The body carried it alongside movement without distinction. The rhythm remained stable. The march continued. By the end of repeated days, the combined effect of weight and movement shaped the overall experience of each step. The feet carried both the ground and the load together. These two elements became linked through repetition. The body adapted to this connection. Movement remained steady. The movement continued under constant weight, with each step carrying both the load and the ground beneath it. The rhythm stayed steady as pressure moved quietly through the body with every step. And over time, the condition of the road itself would begin to stand out more clearly, with uneven surfaces shaping each step in a way that could not be ignored. The roads used during Roman marches were often described as well built, but their surfaces were not always even. From a distance, they appeared structured and stable, with layers of stone arranged in a defined pattern. Up close, the surface revealed small variations in height and spacing. These differences shaped how each step was placed. The movement continued without adjusting to each detail. Stone roads were made from large, fitted pieces that formed a durable path. These stones were not perfectly level with one another. Slight rises and shallow gaps created a surface that required constant adjustment from the feet. The pattern repeated across long distances. The body responded to these small changes without stopping. In some areas, the road had worn down through repeated use. Edges became smoother, but not always flatter. Depressions formed where many feet had passed before. These changes altered how weight was distributed in each step. The surface remained firm, but not uniform. Where maintenance had not been recent, the structure of the road showed more variation. Stones could shift slightly or settle unevenly over time. This created a less predictable surface underfoot. The difference was not dramatic, but it remained present. Movement continued through it. It is notable how a road built for strength did not always provide a consistent surface for those who walked upon it. Beyond paved roads, many sections of the march took place on dirt paths. These paths changed more easily with the weather and repeated movement. Some areas became compact and firm, while others remained loose. The difference could be felt in how the foot met the ground. Each type required a slightly different response. On compact dirt, the surface offered a steady base. The foot landed with less variation in height. Pressure was distributed more evenly. The movement felt more stable in these areas. The rhythm continued without disruption. Loose dirt created a different experience. The surface shifted slightly under pressure. Each step sank just enough to change the balance. The body adjusted quickly to maintain position. These changes remained small but constant. In areas where both stone and dirt were present, the transition between surfaces added another layer of variation. A firm step on stone could be followed by a softer one on dirt. The body responded without pause. The pattern of movement absorbed the difference. The line continued forward. In a modern setting, roads are often made to be flat and predictable, reducing the need for constant adjustment while walking. The edges of stones created points of uneven contact. A step that landed partly on one stone and partly on another produced a slight shift in pressure. The body compensated for this without visible delay. These small corrections became part of the movement. The rhythm remained steady. Gaps between stones also influenced the experience. These spaces were often shallow but noticeable. A foot could settle slightly into them before rising again. This created a repeated pattern of small changes in height. The body adjusted continuously. Water could collect in the lower sections of the road after rain. These areas became softer or more slippery. The surface changed without altering the structure of the march. Movement continued at the same pace. The body adapted internally. Dust gathered on top of both stone and dirt surfaces. It formed a thin layer that shifted with each step. This layer could soften initial contact, but did not remove the unevenness beneath. The ground remained varied. The rhythm continued. The surface beneath the feet changed often, but the pattern of movement remained consistent. New soldiers noticed these variations more clearly at first. Each change in height or texture required attention. The need to adjust felt more immediate. Over time, this awareness often decreased. The body adapted to the pattern. Experienced soldiers moved with fewer visible adjustments. Their steps appeared even despite the uneven surface. The body had learned to respond without hesitation. Movement became more consistent. The rhythm remained unchanged. The structure of the road did not dictate the pace of the march. Instead, the pace remained constant while the body adapted to the surface. Each step followed the same pattern regardless of variation. The line maintained its form. Movement continued. There was no single type of road that defined the entire journey. Instead, the march passed through many different surfaces. Each introduced its own small variations. The body absorbed these changes into the same rhythm. The experience remained continuous. As time passed, the awareness of uneven ground became less distinct. The surface still influenced each step, but it required less attention. The body adjusted automatically. Movement continued without interruption. The pattern held steady. By the end of long marches, the road was not remembered as a single surface. It was experienced as a sequence of small changes. Each step had met a slightly different condition. The body had adapted to all of them. The movement remained consistent. The variation in roads did not change the structure of marching. It changed only how each step was experienced. The body responded to these differences without altering pace. The line remained stable. The rhythm continued. The roads remained uneven, with stones, gaps, and shifting surfaces shaping each step in quiet ways. The movement continued across these variations without changing its steady rhythm, and as the march carried on, the changing weather would begin to alter the ground itself, making each step feel different depending on heat, rain, or cold. The conditions of the march were shaped not only by the road, but also by the weather that surrounded it. Heat, cold, and rain altered the surface beneath the feet without changing the structure of movement. These changes did not stop the march, but they influenced how each step was experienced. The body continued forward while adjusting to these conditions. The rhythm remained steady despite variation in the environment. In warm conditions, the ground absorbed heat from the sun over time. Surfaces that felt mild in the early hours became warmer as the day progressed. This change was gradual and often went unnoticed at first. The feet remained in contact with the same ground, but the sensation shifted. The body adjusted without pause. Stone roads held heat more than dirt paths. Once warmed, they retained that warmth for longer periods. Each step returned this stored heat upward through the foot. The difference between early morning and midday became more noticeable. The movement continued without any change in pace. Dirt paths reacted differently to heat. They warmed more slowly and did not hold temperature as long. The surface remained more variable depending on exposure to sunlight. Shaded areas felt different from open sections. These differences were absorbed into the same pattern of movement. It is notable how the same road could feel entirely different within a single day, without changing its form. Rain introduced another type of change to the surface. Dry ground became softer, and loose dirt could turn into a more compact layer. This altered how the foot met the ground. Contact became less firm in some areas and heavier in others. Movement continued through these changes. On stone roads, rain created a thin layer of moisture that changed traction. The surface became smoother in certain places, especially where the stone had already been worn by use. The foot required slightly more control to maintain balance. These adjustments were small and continuous. The rhythm remained stable. Mud could form where dirt paths absorbed enough water. This created a softer surface that shifted under pressure. Each step required a different kind of response from the body. The foot sank slightly before lifting again. That small pull changed the feeling of forward movement without changing the speed of it. Cold conditions affected the ground in a different way. The surface became firmer and less flexible. Early in the day, the road could feel harder underfoot, especially before the sun had fully warmed it. The body adjusted to this change as it did with others. The movement stayed steady across these colder stretches. In a modern setting, weather often changes plans or routes, while here it changed only the sensation, not the movement itself. Wind did not directly alter the ground, but it influenced how the body experienced the environment. It could cool the surface, dry wet patches, or carry dust across the path. These changes affected the overall sensation of movement without changing its structure. The feet remained in contact with the ground through all of it. The rhythm continued. Transitions between different weather conditions occurred gradually. A cool morning could move into a warmer midday, followed by evening air that felt lighter again. Each phase altered the road in small ways. The body adapted continuously, often without a clear moment of notice. Movement remained unchanged. The combination of weather and surface created a wide range of conditions within a single march. Heat, moisture, dust, and texture interacted with each other. These interactions changed how pressure was felt in the feet and legs. The body responded without breaking rhythm. The line continued forward. New soldiers often noticed these changes more clearly. Differences in temperature and surface required more attention from them. A warm stone road or a wet dirt path stood out more sharply in the early days. Over time, this awareness often decreased. Repetition made these shifts feel less separate from the march itself. The weather did not change the structure of the march, but it shaped how each step was felt underfoot. Experienced soldiers moved with less visible reaction to changing weather conditions. Their steps remained even despite shifts in surface temperature or texture. The body had adapted to a wide range of conditions over time. Movement remained consistent across dry, wet, warm, and cold stretches. The rhythm continued. The presence of the weather did not define the pace of the march. Instead, it added variation within the same repeated pattern. Each condition was absorbed without changing the outward structure. The body adjusted internally while the line held its form. Movement remained steady. There was no single condition that lasted through an entire journey. The weather shifted over time, and each shift altered the road slightly. A surface that felt firm in the morning could feel warm and sharp later in the day. These changes did not interrupt movement. The pattern remained stable. Short pauses did not remove the influence of the weather. The ground retained its heat or moisture even after the soldiers stopped for a moment. When movement resumed, the same conditions remained underfoot. The body adjusted again without delay. The rhythm continued from where it had paused. Over time, the relationship between weather and movement became more settled. The body carried forward regardless of external change. Heat, rain, cold, and wind remained part of the experience, but not separate from it. They shaped the road without reshaping the routine. The day continued through them. By the end of the long marches, the weather was not remembered as a single condition. It was experienced as a sequence of gradual shifts that changed the road a little at a time. Each phase altered the ground in ways that had to be carried through the feet. The body adapted to each one. Movement remained consistent from start to finish. The ground shifted with heat, rain, cold, and wind, changing how each step was felt without breaking the steady rhythm. The body continued forward, adjusting quietly to these conditions as they moved across the road and through the day. And as these changes kept pressing into the feet, discipline itself would begin to matter more clearly, holding the line together even when the road and weather gave the body no easy surface to trust. The movement of Roman soldiers depended on more than strength and habit. It also depended on a shared structure that held the line together from the first steps of the day. Each man moved within that structure rather than outside it. The pattern of marching was supported by expectation as much as by the body. This gave the line a steadiness that did not come from comfort. From the beginning of a march, position mattered. Each soldier kept his place in relation to the men around him. This reduced the need for constant choices about speed or spacing. The body followed an arrangement that had already been set. Movement became easier to maintain because much of it was already organized. That order remained useful when the road changed. Uneven stones, loose dirt, heat, and weight all affected what the body felt underfoot. Even so, the line continued in the same broad pattern. The structure of the group reduced hesitation. Each soldier kept moving because the movement around him continued as well. Discipline also shaped the rhythm of the day. Marching was not treated as something to discuss again and again. It was part of what had to be done, and that expectation gave the movement a firm shape. The body adjusted within that shape rather than trying to change it. This made continuation more likely than a pause. It is notable how a line of men could keep moving, not because the road became easier, but because order left a little room for stopping to think about it. The force of discipline was not always loud or dramatic. Much of it appeared in ordinary things, in keeping pace, holding position, and moving without visible delay. These repeated actions gave the march its regular form. The body might register strain or discomfort, but the outward pattern stayed the same. What mattered most was that the line held together. When people move alone, changes in comfort often change the way they walk. A rough patch of ground may slow the pace, and a heavy load may lead to a longer pause. Inside a disciplined formation, those changes still existed, but they were managed differently. The body adjusted quietly while the group kept the same general speed. The individual response became less visible. This did not mean the body was unaffected. It meant that sensation had less power to alter the shared movement. Discipline acted like a frame around discomfort, heat, fatigue, and pressure. These things remained present, but they stayed inside the pattern. The line advanced while many small difficulties were carried in silence. Over time, repeated obedience to that pattern made it feel more natural. The body learned not only the pace of marching, but also the expectation that it would continue. This reduced hesitation when the road became harder or the day grew longer. A soldier did not need to decide again at every moment. The answer had already been set by routine. In a modern setting, people often adjust movement around comfort and convenience, while here the body was expected to adjust itself around a fixed pattern instead. New soldiers would have felt this structure more clearly at first. They still noticed the effort of keeping pace, the need to hold position, and the pressure of not falling out of line. These demands showed in the way they carried themselves. Their attention remained divided between the road, their own body, and the men around them. The march required not just movement, but controlled movement. Experienced soldiers often appeared steadier in the same conditions. Their steps were not free of effort, but the effort showed less. The body had already learned how to stay within the rhythm without visible hesitation. Their place in the line was maintained with fewer corrections. This gave the formation a more settled appearance. Discipline also limited how much individual discomfort could shape the pace. A soldier who felt strain in the feet, legs, or shoulders still had to continue within the shared rhythm. The group did not reorganize itself around one person's experience. This made the line less sensitive to individual disruption. The movement remained larger than any single body within it. There was also a practical side to this order. A line that kept its spacing and pace was easier to guide and easier to maintain across distance. Regular movement reduced confusion. Each soldier could anticipate the speed and position of the others. This made the march more stable, even when the body was tired. Discipline gave movement a dependable form. Discipline did not remove strain from the body, but it prevented strain from becoming the thing that decided whether the line moved or stopped. The same structure shaped how pauses were understood. When the line rested, rest was temporary and still part of the larger pattern. The expectation of continued movement remained present even while the body was still. A stop was not treated as a release from the march. It was only a short pause inside it. Because of this, starting again required little change in mindset. The line formed, pace returned, and the rhythm resumed from where it had paused. The body carried forward what it had already been feeling. Relief was brief and limited. Discipline made the return to movement feel immediate. The group itself strengthened this process. Each soldier could read the movement of others and stay aligned with it. The line created a visible standard for pace and spacing. Order did not depend only on commands, but also on repetition and shared motion. Each person reinforced the pattern by remaining inside it. In this way, discipline often worked quietly. It appeared through repetition so regular that it seemed ordinary. The body rose, moved, paused, and moved again within the same known frame. What began as something imposed could become something expected. The march depended on that expectation as much as on muscle. As days passed, the connection between discipline and movement became harder to separate. The line held together because the men within it had learned to keep it that way. Order shaped rhythm, rhythm shaped routine, and routine reduced hesitation. The body no longer had to invent a response to each difficulty. It continued inside a pattern already built for continuation. By the end of many marches, discipline could be seen not as a separate idea, but as part of the movement itself. It was visible in spacing, pace, and the way the line resumed after pauses. Heat, rough ground, and fatigue remained, but they no longer changed the outward form very much. The soldiers kept moving because the structure around them kept moving too. Order gave endurance a practical shape. The line continued under a steady structure that held pace, spacing, and expectation together even when the body met heat, weight, and rough ground. The rhythm stayed firm because discipline gave each step a place inside something larger than individual comfort. And once that rhythm paused, the shortness of rest itself would begin to stand out more clearly. with tired feet given only a brief stillness before the road claimed them again. After hours of steady movement, the moments when the line stopped were limited in both time and purpose. Rest did not fully separate itself from the pattern of marching. It appeared as a short pause rather than a complete break. The body shifted from movement to stillness without changing the structure of the day. The rhythm continued, even when the feet were no longer stepping forward. When the signal to stop came, the transition was immediate. The line slowed and then settled into place without disorder. Each soldier remained close to his position. There was no extended adjustment or delay before stillness. Movement gave way to rest in a direct and controlled manner. The act of resting often began with simple actions. A soldier might lower the weight carried on his shoulders. The body adjusted to a different kind of pressure as the load shifted. Feet remained in contact with the ground, but without forward motion. The change in sensation was noticeable, though brief. Some sat or crouched where they stood, using the ground itself as support. Others remained upright, allowing only a partial release of effort. There was no single way to rest that applied to all. The common element was the short duration. Stillness did not last long. It is notable how rest existed as a pause within movement rather than a separate state of its own. During these pauses, attention could briefly return to the feet. Dust, heat, and pressure remained present even without motion. A soldier might shift weight from one foot to the other. These small adjustments did not remove sensation, but they changed its distribution. The body responded within a limited time. In some cases, sandals were adjusted or briefly loosened. Straps could be shifted to reduce pressure in certain areas. These changes were practical and quick. There was no extended period for repair. The condition of footwear was managed only as much as time allowed. The ground itself still shaped the experience of rest. Sitting on stone or dirt did not fully remove contact with uneven surfaces. The body remained connected to the same environment as during movement. The difference was in stillness rather than in location. The sensation did not disappear. Short rest did not remove the accumulation of the day's movement. Pressure and fatigue remained in the body. The pause provided only a temporary change. Once movement resumed, the same sensations returned. The rhythm continued from where it had paused. In a modern setting, rest often aims to remove strain, while here it simply reduces motion for a short time. New soldiers often experience these pauses as more noticeable. The contrast between movement and stillness felt clearer. The body responded more strongly to the brief relief. Over time, this contrast became less distinct. The routine reduced the difference between moving and stopping. Experienced soldiers treated rest as part of the same pattern. The transition from motion to stillness and back again required little adjustment. The body remained prepared to continue. There was no need to redefine the pace after stopping. The rhythm resumed naturally. The duration of rest did not vary widely. It was determined by the needs of the march rather than an individual's condition. This created a consistent pattern across different days. The body adapted to this timing. Movement and rest became linked within the same structure. During rest, there was little separation between individuals. Each soldier remained within the formation. The group did not disperse widely. This maintained order and allowed movement to resume quickly. The line stayed ready to continue. The brief nature of rest did not change the march, but it showed how limited the time away from movement could be. The body adjusted quickly when rest ended. Weight was lifted again, and the feet returned to motion. There was no extended transition back into the march. The same rhythm resumed almost immediately. The pattern remained unchanged. The memory of rest did not extend far into the next phase of movement. Once the line began to move again, attention shifted back to maintaining pace. The brief pause became part of the overall pattern, rather than a separate experience. The body carried forward. Rest did not remove the effects of the weather or terrain. The ground retained its heat or moisture. When movement resumed, these conditions were still present. The body adjusted again without delay. The rhythm continued. Over time, the relationship between movement and rest became more stable. The body learned to expect only short pauses. This reduced reliance on rest for recovery. Movement remained the dominant part of the day. The pattern held steady. By the end of repeated marches, rest was not defined by comfort or relief. It was defined by its position within the routine. The body used it to continue rather than to recover fully. The line moved forward again without change. The rhythm remained consistent. The simplicity of rest reflected the structure of the march itself. There was little variation in how it was carried out. Each pause resembled the one before it. The body adapted to this repetition. Movement and stillness became part of the same cycle. The pauses remained short and simple, offering only a brief shift from movement before the body returned to the same steady rhythm. The ground, the weight, and the conditions were still present when motion began again, unchanged by the moment of stillness. And as the day came to an end, the act of building camp would begin to mark a more defined pause, where the body finally stopped for longer than a passing moment. As the day moved toward its end, the pattern of continuous movement began to shift into a different kind of activity. The line slowed, and the focus moved away from forward motion. This change did not happen suddenly, but it followed a familiar structure. The body, after hours of repeated steps, adjusted to a new task. The rhythm changed, but it did not disappear. The location of the camp was chosen based on practical conditions rather than comfort. The ground needed to support many people and allow for order. Uneven surfaces, stones, and soil were still present. The environment did not become easier, it simply became a place to stop. The body remained connected to the same kind of ground as during the march. Once the line stopped, movement did not end completely. Instead, it shifted into organized activity. Soldiers began to prepare the space for the night. This involved clearing small areas and arranging what they carried. The body continued to work, though in a different pattern. The act of building a camp followed a routine that was repeated each evening. Tasks were carried out in a consistent order. There was little variation in how this was done. The repetition created a sense of structure similar to marching. The body moved within this pattern without needing to decide each step. It is notable how the end of movement did not mean rest, but the beginning of another kind of work. The ground still shaped how the body was positioned during these tasks. Kneeling, bending, and standing all depended on the surface beneath. Stones and uneven areas affected balance. The body adjusted in the same quiet way as during the march. The environment remained part of every action. Feet that had carried the weight of the day remained in contact with the ground. Even without forward motion, the sensation of pressure did not fully disappear. The body shifted weight from one position to another. These changes provided only a slight variation in feeling. The connection to the ground continued. Some soldiers removed or adjusted their sandals during this time. This allowed brief changes in contact between the foot and the surface. The ground could feel cooler or different after the heat of the day. These moments did not last long. Activity soon continued. The arrangement of the camp followed a known structure. Spaces were organized to maintain order. Each soldier had a place within that structure. This reduced confusion and allowed the process to move quickly. The pattern was familiar and repeated. In a modern setting, the end of the day often separates work from rest, while here both remained closely connected. New soldiers noticed this transition more clearly. The shift from marching to building camp felt like a separate phase. The body responded differently to these tasks. Over time, this distinction became less sharp. Both activities blended into the same daily routine. Experienced soldiers moved through these tasks with less visible effort. Their actions followed the pattern without hesitation. The body had adapted to both movement and preparation. There was little pause between one and the other. The rhythm continued in a different form. The tools and materials used in building the camp were carried during the march. Their weight had been part of each step throughout the day. Now, they were used directly. This created a connection between movement and preparation. The body's experience both as part of the same process. The ground remained a constant element in all of this. It supported movement, work, and rest alike. Its unevenness did not change with the time of day. The body continued to adjust to it. The environment remained consistent. The act of building a camp did not remove the effects of the day, but it extended them into a different form of activity. As the camp took shape, the pace of activity gradually slowed. Tasks were completed, and movement became less frequent. The body began to settle into stillness. This transition was gradual rather than immediate. The rhythm softened. The first extended moments of rest appeared after these tasks were finished. The body no longer needed to maintain pace or perform repeated actions. Stillness lasted longer than during short pauses in the march. The feet were no longer required to carry weight forward. The change was noticeable, even in rest. The ground continued to influence the body. Sleeping surfaces were simple and often uneven. The connection to the environment remained direct. The body adjusted to this without much variation. Rest did not remove the presence of the ground. The memory of movement remained in the body even after stopping. Sensations from the day did not disappear immediately. The feet and legs still carried the record of repeated steps. This gradually faded over time. The body settled into a different state. The cycle of marching and building camp repeated across days. Each evening followed a similar pattern. The body adapted to this repetition. Movement, work, and rest became connected parts of the same routine. The structure remained stable. By the end of many days, the act of building camp no longer stood apart from the march. It became another phase within the same pattern. The body moved through it with the same consistency. The rhythm extended beyond walking. The routine held. The day moved from marching into building camp without a clear break, carrying the same rhythm into a slower form of activity. The body settled into longer stillness only after the work was done, with the ground still shaping how it rested. And as night continued, even simple acts like cleaning would reveal how little attention was given to the condition of the feet after such long days. After the work of building the camp was completed, the pace of activity slowed, but it did not lead to detailed care of the body. The transition into rest remained simple and limited. Cleaning was part of the routine, but it was not extended or complex. The body carried the marks of the day into the evening. Movement had ended, but its effects remained visible. Dust from the road settled across the feet, legs, and lower parts of the body. This dust had built up gradually through hours of walking. It did not form all at once, but layer by layer over time. By the end of the day, it became part of how the body appeared. Cleaning addressed this only in a basic way. Water, when available, was used sparingly. It was not always present in large amounts, and it could not always be used freely for washing. A soldier might rinse his feet or wipe away visible dirt. These actions were brief and practical. They removed surface material without changing deeper conditions. The ground remained part of the process even during cleaning. Feet that had been on stone and dirt all day were still placed on similar surfaces. There was no clear separation between clean and unclean areas. The environment continued to shape the experience. The body adjusted without resistance. It is notable how cleaning did not aim to restore the body, but simply to reduce what was most visible from the day. The structure of the camp did not include long periods dedicated to personal care. Time was limited and shared among many tasks that still needed attention before full rest began. Cleaning was one part of a sequence rather than a central activity. The body was attended to only briefly. The routine moved forward. Some soldiers used cloth or simple materials to wipe their feet. This removed loose dirt and dust that had collected between the skin and the straps of sandals. The action was direct and did not involve detailed attention. It served a practical purpose. The body remained largely unchanged beyond this. In some cases, a soldier may have loosened a strap or lifted a sandal briefly to shake out grit. Small stones and dry particles could remain trapped after long movement. Removing them brought a slight difference in sensation, but not a complete change. The feet still held the pressure of the day. Cleaning remained limited in effect. The sensation of the feet did not shift significantly after cleaning. Pressure, fatigue, and minor irritation remained present in the skin and deeper in the legs. The removal of surface dirt did not alter deeper conditions. The body carried these forward into rest. The change was limited to what could be seen. In a modern setting, cleaning often involves careful attention and several steps, while here it remained minimal, practical, and brief. The tools available for cleaning were simple. There were no special items meant for full foot care after marching. The process relied on cloth, water when it could be found, and quick manual effort. This kept the activity brief and consistent. The pattern did not vary widely from one evening to another. New soldiers might have noticed the limited nature of this process more clearly. The expectation that washing would bring noticeable relief was not always met. The body didn't return to a different state after a quick rinse or wipe. Over time, this became more familiar. The routine shaped expectation. Experienced soldiers treated cleaning as part of the same pattern as marching and rest. It did not stand out as a separate or important event in the day. The body moved through it quickly and without much reflection. There was little change in rhythm. The process remained consistent. The condition of the feet reflected the accumulation of the day. Small marks, dryness, roughness, and traces of repeated friction remained even after visible dirt was removed. These were not changed much through basic cleaning, they were simply carried forward. The body adapted to their presence. The simplicity of cleaning did not remove the effects of the march, but it allowed the routine to continue without delay or complication. The environment influenced cleaning just as it influenced movement, dust, temperature, available water, and the nature of the ground all shaped how it was done. These factors did not change the structure of the routine, but they altered the small details. Some evenings allowed a little more washing, while others allowed very little. The pattern itself stayed stable. As the evening progressed, activity reduced further. Cleaning gave way to rest without a clear boundary. The body shifted from one state to another gradually, not suddenly. There was no extended phase of recovery. Stillness became more complete over time. The ground continued to define how the body rested. Surfaces remained firm and often uneven, even after the feet had been briefly cleaned. Washing did not change this condition. The body adjusted once again to the same kind of contact. The environment remained consistent. The memory of movement stayed in the body even after cleaning. Sensations from the march did not disappear with the removal of dust. The feet still carried the record of repeated steps, pressure, and heat. This faded slowly rather than immediately. The process of rest continued in that condition. The cycle of movement, work, cleaning, and rest repeated across days. Each evening followed a similar pattern, with only small differences based on place and weather. The body adapted to this repetition. The routine became familiar in both action and expectation. Variation remained limited. By the end of repeated days, cleaning was not understood as a way to restore the body fully. It was simply one small part of maintaining the daily pattern. The body carried forward what could not be removed in a few brief actions. The structure of the evening remained steady. Movement would return the next day. The body moved from work into simple cleaning without much change, carrying dust, pressure, and dryness into the night. The routine stayed steady, with only a brief effort to remove what could be seen on the surface before stillness took over, and as this repeated across many evenings, the small injuries left by marching would begin to stand out more clearly, remaining on the feet even after the dirt had been washed away. By the time several days of marching had passed, the condition of the feet began to show more clearly. The surface of the skin reflected repeated contact with stone, dirt, heat, and uneven ground. These changes did not appear all at once, but built gradually over time. Each step added a small effect that was easy to miss in the moment. The body carried these signs forward without interruption. Minor injuries were common during long marches. Small cuts, Blisters, sore spots, and areas of irritation formed through repeated pressure and friction. These were not unusual events, but expected results of movement over distance. The body responded to them while continuing to move. The pattern of marching remained unchanged even when the feet no longer looked untouched. Blisters often formed in areas where friction repeated in the same place. The movement of the foot against the sandal, the strap, or the ground created this effect over time. At first, the sensation was light, then it became more noticeable with every mile. Even so, movement continued. The body adjusted around the irritation instead of stopping because of it. Small cuts could appear when sharp stones or rough edges met the skin directly. These were often shallow but persistent, especially when the road stayed rough for long stretches. Dust and dirt could settle into them during movement and remain there until evening. The body carried these conditions without stopping. The rhythm of marching remained steady through all of it. It is notable how visible signs of injury did not interrupt movement, but were carried forward as part of the routine. The accumulation of these small injuries changed how the feet met the ground. Certain areas became more sensitive than others, and pressure no longer felt evenly spread. The body adjusted slightly in response, shifting weight where possible without breaking rhythm. These changes were subtle and did not alter the overall pace. Movement continued in the same repeated pattern. Swelling could occur after long periods of continuous walking. The feet expanded slightly within sandals or against the ground itself. This changed how pressure was distributed with each step, especially late in the day. The body responded by maintaining balance rather than reducing motion. The line moved forward even when the feet felt less contained than before. Some injuries remained small but lasted for many days. A rubbed heel, a split in the skin, or a sore patch under the front of the foot could return with each march. These were not dramatic conditions, but they were persistent ones. Their effect came from repetition rather than size. The body learned to move with them present. The presence of injury did not lead to extended treatment during the day. There was little time available for focused care once the line was already in motion. The body continued to function with these conditions and carried them from one stretch of road to the next. The routine of marching remained dominant. Sensation was carried rather than fully resolved. In a modern setting, even minor foot injuries often lead to rest, cleaning, and protection, while here they remained inside the day's movement. Dust and moisture could affect how injuries feel. Dry conditions made the skin rougher, while dampness softened it and changed how friction was distributed. A sore area that felt manageable in one part of the day could feel different later. These changes influenced sensation without changing structure. The body adjusted internally and kept moving. Heat also played a role in how injuries were experienced. Warm ground and long exposure could make irritated skin feel more present. The road did not need to be extreme for this change to become noticeable. A familiar sore spot could begin to stand out more clearly by midday. Still, the rhythm of the line remained steady. New soldiers often noticed these injuries more strongly in the early stages. The appearance of blisters or cuts felt significant at first, not only because of pain, but because of how clearly the body seemed to mark the march. Each step drew attention to these areas. Over time, this awareness often decreased. The routine reduced how sharply they were noticed. Experienced soldiers moved with fewer visible reactions to these same conditions. The body had adapted to continue despite irritation, swelling, or rough patches in the skin. Injuries did not disappear, but they became less central to attention during movement. The road was still felt, but the reaction to it became quieter. Motion remained steady. Injuries did not define the movement, but they became part of how each step was experienced over time. The structure of the march limited how much these injuries could affect pace. The group moved together, and individual conditions did not often change that shared rhythm. The line remained consistent across distance, even when some feet carried more damage than others. Each soldier adjusted internally and in small ways. The pattern held. There was no clear separation between uninjured and injured movement. Both existed within the same routine and often within the same day. The body carried forward regardless of condition, and the difference was felt more than it was shown. A soldier might walk with a sore foot and still appear steady from a distance. The march continued in its usual form. Short periods of rest did not fully change the condition of the feet. Blisters, cuts, and irritation remained present after pauses, and sometimes became more noticeable once the body stopped moving. When marching began again, the same conditions returned to each step. Relief was limited and temporary. The rhythm continued. Cleaning at the end of the day could remove dirt from injured areas, but it did not fully restore them. The visible marks of the road often remained in the skin after dust had been washed away. A quick rinse could change the surface, but not the deeper soreness. The body carried these signs into rest. Recovery was slower than the return to motion. The environment continued to influence how injuries developed. Rough roads increased friction, loose surfaces shifted pressure, and long heat changed how the skin responded to repeated contact. Each condition added something small, and those small additions built over time. The body adapted without altering pace. The pattern remained steady beneath all of it. By the end of repeated marches, injuries were no longer treated as separate events. They became part of the general condition of the feet, much like dust, pressure, and tiredness. The body carried both the road and the marks of the road together. What mattered was not whether the feet were unchanged, but whether they could continue. The routine held steady. The feet carried cuts, blisters, swelling, and roughened skin forward without pause, holding the record of many days directly on their surface. The rhythm remained steady, even as these small injuries changed how the ground was felt from one step to the next. And as this continued, the body would begin to notice these sensations differently, until experience itself changed the way pain and fatigue were understood. After many days of marching, the body no longer responded to sensation in the same way as it had at the beginning. The ground, the weight, and the repeated motion were still present, but they were not noticed with the same intensity. What had once stood out clearly began to settle into the background. The body continued to move through the same conditions. The difference was in how those conditions were perceived. At the start, each step could feel distinct and separate. The contact between the foot and the ground was more noticeable, especially on uneven or rough surfaces. Small changes in texture or pressure drew attention. The body responded more directly to these differences. Over time, this clarity began to fade. Repetition played a role in this change. The same motion repeated across hours and days reduced the need to respond to each variation. The body learned the pattern and followed it without focusing on each detail. Sensation did not disappear, but it became less central. Movement remained consistent. The structure of the march supported this shift. The rhythm of the line remained steady regardless of individual perception. The body adapted to stay within that rhythm. Attention moved away from each step and toward maintaining position. The pattern continued without interruption. It is notable how the same conditions could feel less demanding over time, even though they had not changed. The feet still met the same surfaces as before. Stones remained uneven, dirt shifted, and heat affected the ground. These conditions did not improve or become easier. Instead, the body adjusted to them through repeated exposure. The difference came from adaptation rather than a change in the environment. Pain and discomfort followed a similar pattern. What had once been sharp or noticeable became more muted. The body reduced its reaction to repeated sensations. This did not mean the sensation was gone. It meant that it required less attention. This change did not happen all at once. It developed gradually through repeated experience. Each day of marching contributed to it. The body learned to carry sensation without reacting strongly. Movement continued within the same pattern. The relationship between attention and sensation shifted as well. At first, discomfort could draw focus away from the rhythm of the march. Over time, attention remained more stable. The body continued forward without interruption. The line held its form. In a modern setting, repeated discomfort often leads to avoidance, while here it led to a reduced response within continued movement. New soldiers experienced the early stage of this process more clearly. Each change in the ground or condition of the feet required attention. The body responded more actively. Over time, this response became less noticeable. The routine shaped perception. Experienced soldiers showed fewer visible signs of reacting to the same conditions. Their steps remained even across different surfaces. The body had adapted to carry sensation without altering movement. This gave the march a more uniform appearance. The rhythm remained unchanged. The difference between new and experienced soldiers was not in the conditions they faced. It was in how those conditions were processed. Both moved over the same ground and carried similar weight. The variation lay in perception. The pattern remained the same. There was no clear boundary where this change in perception occurred. It developed over time without a single moment of transition. The body adjusted gradually. The shift became noticeable only after it had already taken place. Movement continued throughout. Perception changed quietly, not by removing sensation, but by reducing how strongly it shaped attention during movement. The environment continued to influence the body even as perception shifted. Heat, cold, and surface changes still affected sensation. These influences remained present. The body responded to them with less visible reaction. The rhythm continued. Short periods of rest did not reverse this process. The body returned to movement with the same adjusted perception. Sensation remained part of each step. The difference was in how it was experienced. Movement resumed without change. The accumulation of experience created a more stable pattern of movement. The body required fewer adjustments to maintain balance and pace. Each step followed the same structure. The feet met the ground in a more consistent way. The march remained steady. This change in perception supported the continuation of long marches. The body could move through repeated conditions without interruption. Sensation did not need to be removed for movement to continue. It only needed to be managed differently. The routine held. Over time, perception became aligned with the structure of the march. The body followed the rhythm without focusing on each detail. The ground remained uneven, and the weight remained constant. The difference was in awareness. Movement continued. By the end of repeated days, the experience of marching became more even. Variation still existed, but it was less noticeable. The body carried forward with reduced reaction. The pattern of movement remained stable. The rhythm held. The change in perception did not remove the physical reality of the march. It changed how that reality was processed. The body adapted to maintain movement under consistent conditions. This adaptation became part of the routine. The march continued. The same ground, weight, and movement remained, but the body responded to them in a quieter and more even way over time. The rhythm continued without drawing attention to each step, as experience reduced the need to react. And as this settled, the difference between new and experienced soldiers would become more visible, especially in how they noticed the same conditions. At the beginning of their first marches, new soldiers experienced the routine in a way that felt more immediate and clearly defined. Each step stood out as a separate action, and the connection between the foot and the ground was easier to notice. The body had not yet adjusted to repetition. Sensation appeared sharper and more distinct. Movement required steady attention from moment to moment. The ground beneath the feet felt uneven in a noticeable way. Stones, loose dirt, and slight changes in surface created clear differences with each step forward. The body reacted directly to these changes without filtering them. Balance required more effort to maintain across short distances. The pattern of movement had not yet become automatic. Weight carried during the march also felt more present to new soldiers. The load did not blend into the body as easily as it would later. Each shift in balance required attention and a small correction. The connection between the load and the ground was more clearly felt through the legs and feet. Movement continued, but with more awareness than ease. The rhythm of the line provided a structure, but it was not yet internalized. New soldiers followed it carefully rather than naturally, often watching others to stay aligned. Each step was guided by observation as much as by habit. This created a more deliberate form of movement. The body worked to remain in place. It is notable how the same march could feel more demanding, not because conditions were different, but because experience had not yet softened their impact. The feet of new soldiers responded more strongly to repeated contact. Areas of pressure became noticeable sooner and remained in focus longer. Small changes in the surface created clearer differences in sensation. The body had not yet learned to reduce these reactions. Each step remained distinct instead of blending into a pattern. Fatigue also appeared earlier in the day for those without experience. The body had not yet adapted to long periods of continuous movement without interruption. Muscles responded more quickly to repeated effort and load. The need to maintain pace required steady concentration. The march felt longer than it appeared. Short periods of rest created a stronger contrast at this stage. The shift from movement to stillness felt more defined and easier to notice. Relief appeared clearer, even if it lasted only briefly. The body responded strongly to the pause before returning to motion. Movement resumed with renewed awareness of the feet. The process of adaptation had not yet taken place. The body had not learned to carry sensation without reacting to it directly. Each experience remained separate rather than blending into a continuous flow. The march continued through this stage without changing its structure. The rhythm held steady. In a modern setting, early discomfort often leads to slowing down or stopping, while here it was carried forward until the body adjusted to it. As days passed, these early differences began to shift gradually. The body started to respond less strongly to repeated conditions underfoot. Sensation remained present, but it became less sharp and less demanding. The ground felt more consistent, even when it was not. Movement required less attention. The rhythm of the march became easier to follow without constant observation. What had required focus became more automatic through repetition. The body aligned with the pattern without needing frequent correction. This reduced the effort needed to maintain pace. The line remained steady. The weight carried during the march began to blend into the body over time. It no longer felt separate from movement in the same way. Each step carried the same load, but it required less attention to manage. Balance became more stable with fewer adjustments. The pattern continued evenly. The feet adapted to repeated contact with the ground over many days. Areas that had been sensitive became less reactive to pressure and friction. The body adjusted to distribute weight more evenly with each step. This reduced the intensity of sensation during movement. The rhythm remained consistent. The difference between new and experienced soldiers did not lie in the road or the weight, but in how those conditions were processed by the body. Observation of others also supported this transition. New soldiers could see the steady movement of those with more experience and begin to match it. This provided a practical reference for how to move within the line. The body adjusted gradually to that example. The rhythm remained stable. The transition from awareness to routine did not happen at a single moment. It developed slowly across repeated days of movement. Each day contributed to the change in perception. The body learned through repetition rather than instruction. Movement continued throughout the process. The environment remained unchanged during this transition. The same roads, weather, and weight continued to shape each step. The difference lay in how the body responded to these conditions. Sensation became less central to attention. The pattern of marching remained the same. Short rests became less distinct over time as well. The contrast between movement and stillness reduced gradually. The body remained prepared to continue even while paused. The rhythm resumed with little adjustment after each stop. The pattern held steady. By the end of this transition, the experience of marching became more even. Variation still existed, but it required less attention to manage. The body carried forward with fewer visible reactions to the ground. The march remained unchanged in structure. Movement continued without interruption. The early stage of noticing every detail gave way to a more stable form of movement. The body no longer responded to each change separately as before. Instead, it moved through them as part of a continuous pattern. The rhythm remained steady across different conditions. The routine held firm. The difference between new and experienced soldiers became visible in this stability. Both moved over the same ground, but their reactions no longer matched. One responded to each detail, while the other carried them together without pause. Movement continued in the same line. The early days made each step feel sharp and separate, while later days softened those same conditions into a more even experience. The rhythm remained steady, but the body required less attention to sustain it over distance and time. As this settled further, the sound of marching itself would become more pronounced, forming a steady pattern that carried through the line. As the line moved forward across long distances, the sound created by many feet became a constant part of the experience. It did not stand apart from movement, but existed within it from the first steps of the day. Each step added to a shared pattern of sound that repeated across the ground. This pattern remained steady even as the surface changed underfoot. The rhythm could be heard as much as it could be felt. At the beginning, the sound of marching might appear uneven to a new soldier. Some steps landed harder, while others arrived slightly out of time with the larger line. Small differences in pace created variation in how the sound formed around the group. The ground answered each step in a slightly different way depending on how the foot came down. Over time, these differences began to narrow. As the line settled into a more consistent pace, the sound became more uniform. Many individual steps blended into a single repeated pattern that moved with the column. The differences between one soldier and another became less noticeable than the rhythm they created together. The ground carried this pattern forward with each contact. The sound reflected the order of movement. Different surfaces created different sounds beneath the feet. Stone produced a sharper and more defined contact that could be heard more clearly within the line. Dirt softened the sound and made it less distinct, while loose ground introduced slight variation from one step to the next. These changes did not interrupt the pattern itself. They only changed the texture of how it was heard. It is notable how the sound of many steps became a guide for movement, even though it was only a result of movement in the first place. The body responded to sound as well as to motion. Hearing the rhythm helped maintain pace without constant visual attention to the men ahead. The repeated contact between foot and ground created a pattern that could be followed almost automatically. This reduced the need for each soldier to think about timing at every moment. The line held its form through both sound and motion together. The repetition of sound also reduced the need to focus on individual steps. A soldier could align with the larger pattern instead of measuring each movement separately. The body followed what it heard as much as what it felt through the feet and legs. This created a steadier form of marching over time. The rhythm became easier to maintain. Changes in terrain did not remove the presence of sound, but they altered its quality. A hard road returned a clearer and more distinct beat, while a softer path absorbed some of it. Loose stones produced brief, uneven notes within the larger rhythm. These differences did not break the pattern. They were folded into it as part of the road itself. The sound also reflected the weight carried by each soldier. Heavier steps produced a stronger contact with the surface and gave more force to the shared rhythm. The load pressed downward through the body and into the ground, and that pressure could be heard as well as felt. This did not separate one man from the group. It added depth to the larger pattern. In a modern setting, rhythm often comes from tools or music outside the body, while here it rose directly from feet, weight, and ground moving together. In quieter stretches of the day, the marching sound became easier to notice. When there was less activity around the line, the repeated contact of many feet stood out more clearly. The pattern became almost continuous, with one step leading into the next without much of a break. This did not change the movement, but it made the structure of the march more audible. The body continued within it. For new soldiers, this sound could feel unfamiliar at first. It was not only the noise itself, but the demand to align with it that stood out. A step that came slightly too early or too late could be felt in relation to the rest of the line. This required attention during the early days. Over time, the body learned to fit into the larger rhythm more naturally. Experienced soldiers moved within the sound with less effort. Their steps matched the shared pattern without visible correction. The rhythm of the line had already been absorbed into their movement. They no longer needed to listen in a conscious way to stay aligned. The body followed the pattern almost automatically. Sound also helped preserve order over distance. Men did not always need to study one another closely when the rhythm itself carried information about pace and continuity. The repeated beat of the line gave a clear sense of whether the movement remained steady. This supported the structure of the march quietly. The pattern continued forward. The sound did not replace discipline or routine, but it reinforced them by giving the body a steady pattern to remain inside. Short pauses noticeably changed this experience. When the line stopped, the sudden absence of repeated footsteps made stillness feel more complete. What had been constant a moment earlier was briefly gone. This made the return of movement easier to notice when it began again. The rhythm resumed almost at once. The environment influenced how the sound travelled. Open areas allowed it to spread more clearly, while uneven ground broke it into slightly different tones. In some places, the road returned the sound sharply, and in others it seemed to stay lower and softer. These differences changed how the pattern was heard, but not how it functioned. The line stayed together. As days passed, the sound became part of what was expected from marching. It no longer stood out as a separate detail every time it appeared. Instead, it blended into the larger routine of movement, weight, and road. The body moved with it without needing to examine it closely. Repetition made it ordinary. By the end of repeated marches, the sound of many feet no longer needed to draw attention to remain important. It stayed present in the background as part of the line's steady movement. Individual steps still belonged to individual bodies, but once they entered the line, they contributed to something larger. The shared rhythm gave shape to the day. The march carried on within that sound. The steady sound of many steps carried the rhythm forward, blending separate bodies into a single moving pattern across stone, dirt, and dust. The body learned to stay inside that pattern without needing to think about it closely, as repetition made the sound as familiar as the road itself. And once that rhythm had settled deeply into the day, the link between movement, food, and routine would begin to stand out more clearly, showing how soldiers ate simply and then kept going without much pause. Food during long marches was not separated from movement in the way it often is in other settings. Eating did not create a long pause or a clear break in the rhythm of the day. Instead, it appeared within the same structure that guided marching, resting, and working. The body received energy while remaining close to motion. The pattern continued without interruption. Meals were simple and carried along with the soldier. The items were chosen for practicality rather than variety or comfort. They could be eaten quickly and without the preparation that required extended time. This allowed food to fit into the movement of the day. The body adjusted to eating within the same routine. The timing of eating did not always follow a fixed or extended schedule. Short pauses in movement could become moments for consuming food. These pauses were limited in duration and did not open into a longer break. Eating took place within them rather than extending them. The rhythm of the march remained unchanged. The act of eating did not fully remove the effects of the day. The body remained aware of weight, ground, heat, and repeated motion. Food did not separate the soldier from these conditions. It existed alongside them, without changing their presence. Movement continued after only a brief shift in activity. It is notable how eating did not interrupt the march, but was absorbed into the same steady pattern of movement. The body processed food while continuing to move. There was no long period of stillness set aside to support digestion comfortably. Instead, movement and digestion occurred together as part of the same daily structure. This created a consistent pattern across the day. The body adapted to this arrangement over time. The types of food carried were suited to this pattern. They could be consumed quickly and without complex preparation. This reduced the need for longer stops and allowed nourishment to remain practical. The act of eating stayed simple and direct. The routine continued without delay. Water also played a role in this process. Drinking could happen during short pauses or while movement slowed for a moment. This supported the body without requiring extended rest. The connection between intake and motion remained close. The rhythm continued in the same form. The presence of food did not change the pace of the line. Instead, it supported the continuation of that pace. The body received what it needed without altering the structure of movement. This helped maintain consistency across long distances. The soldiers continued forward in the same pattern. In a modern setting, meals often create a clear pause in activity, while here eating remained closely tied to ongoing movement. New soldiers often notice this difference early. The expectation of longer or more defined meals was not fully met in the context of marching. Eating felt brief and closely linked to the practical demands of the day. The body adjusted to this pattern gradually over time. The routine shaped expectation. Experienced soldiers treated eating as another part of the same cycle. It did not stand apart from marching or resting in any strong way. The body moved through it without hesitation or special attention. The shift between eating and moving required little adjustment. The pattern remained stable. The connection between food and energy became clearer with repetition. The body learned to use what it received while continuing to move forward. There was no strong separation between nourishment and action. Both existed within the same repeated structure of the day. The rhythm held. Short pauses that included eating did not remove fatigue. They offered limited support for continued motion rather than full recovery. The body resumed movement with the same conditions still present in the feet, legs, and shoulders. Food became part of maintaining the pattern rather than changing it. The day continued in the same shape. Food did not change the structure of the march, but it allowed the body to continue within that structure for longer periods. The environment influenced how and when food was consumed. Heat, terrain, dust, and available time shaped the details of eating from one day to another. These factors did not alter the larger pattern. They only affected how food fit into it in practical ways. The body adapted to those variations. There was no sharp boundary between eating and other activities. A soldier could move from rest to eating and then back to motion in a short sequence with very little separation. These actions remained closely connected throughout the day. The routine continued without creating a distinct new phase. The rhythm did not break. The simplicity of food reflected the structure of the march itself. Both were organized around continuation rather than comfort, detail, or ceremony. The body adapted to this combination over time and learned to accept it as ordinary. Movement and nourishment became linked in the same daily flow. The pattern remained stable. Over time, the act of eating required less attention. It became part of the routine rather than a separate event worth noticing on its own. The body received energy without needing to focus closely on the process. Movement continued without visible interruption afterward. The line remained steady. Even when food was simple, its role remained important. The body could not continue long movement without some form of regular intake. What mattered was not variety, but the steady support it gave to repeated effort. Food remained quiet in the structure of the day, but not unimportant. It helped keep the pattern going. By the end of repeated marches, food was not remembered as a distinct pause in the day. It was experienced as part of the same continuous sequence that included motion, short stops, and resumed motion again. The body moved through it as it moved through everything else. The rhythm remained largely unchanged. The march continued. The connection between food and movement reflected the broader structure of the day. Each element supported the others without standing far apart. The body adapted to this integration through repetition. Movement, rest, and nourishment became parts of the same cycle rather than separate events. The pattern held steady from morning into night. Eating remained brief, and closely tied to movement, supporting the body without interrupting the steady rhythm that carried the day forward. Food, motion, and short pauses blended into one continuous routine, with little separation between what sustained the body and what demanded effort from it. And as this pattern carried on into the evening, the stillness of the night would begin to stand out more clearly, offering the feet and legs a longer pause than anything the day had allowed. As the day of marching came to an end, the body entered a different state that contrasted with the steady rhythm of movement. The line stopped, and the repeated contact between foot and ground no longer continued forward. Stillness replaced motion, but only within the same environment that had shaped the day. The ground remained present beneath the body. The change came from stopping rather than from changing conditions. The first moments after stopping carried a noticeable shift in sensation. The feet, which had been moving continuously, now remained in place. Pressure is no longer transferred forward with each step. Instead, it settled into a more constant form. The body adjusted to this new stillness without leaving the same ground behind. The absence of repeated steps created a different kind of awareness. Sensations that had been part of movement became easier to notice when motion stopped. Areas of pressure, warmth, or irritation could stand out more clearly. The body did not immediately lose what it had carried through the day. It held those conditions in place. The process of lying down or sitting marked a further change. The feet were no longer required to support the body in the same way. Weight shifted away from them and into the ground more evenly. This altered how pressure was distributed. The body responded by settling into stillness. It is notable how stopping movement did not remove the effects of the day, but allowed them to become more noticeable. As the body remained still, the sensation of the feet began to change gradually. Without repeated impact, areas of strain felt different. The absence of motion reduced the constant contact that had defined the day. This created a quieter form of experience. The body adjusted to it slowly. The ground still shaped this rest. Sleeping surfaces remained simple and often uneven. The body did not move to a separate, more comfortable environment. Instead, it remained within the same conditions as the march. The difference was only in how the body interacted with them. Stillness replaced repetition. Temperature also influenced how the body experienced this period. The ground cooled as the day ended, and the air changed with the setting sun. These changes affected the feet and legs. The body responded without needing to move. The sensation shifted gradually. The absence of sound also became noticeable. The steady rhythm of footsteps no longer filled the space. This created a different kind of quiet. The body rested within that quiet. The pattern of the day had paused. In a modern setting, rest often involves a clear separation from the environment. While here it remained within the same conditions as the march, new soldiers often noticed this shift more clearly. The contrast between movement and stillness felt stronger. The body responded more noticeably to the change. Over time, this contrast became less distinct. The routine shaped how rest was experienced. Experienced soldiers entered rest with less visible adjustment. The transition from movement to stillness required little change in behavior. The body had adapted to both states. Movement and rest became parts of the same pattern. The rhythm continued in a quieter form. The duration of a night rest was longer than any pause during the day. This created a more extended period of stillness. The body had time to settle more completely. Sensation changed gradually during this time. The process remained quiet and steady. Despite this longer rest, the effects of the day did not disappear entirely. The feet still carried the record of repeated steps. Pressure, warmth, and minor irritation remained present. The body adjusted to them rather than removing them. The routine held. Night did not remove the strain of the day, but it allowed the body to carry it in stillness rather than in motion. The transition into sleep marked another stage of rest. The body no longer needed to maintain awareness of the ground in the same way. Movement ceased completely for a period. Sensation became less active. The environment remained unchanged. The ground continued to support the body during sleep. Its firmness and unevenness were still present. The difference lay in the body's reduced response. Stillness remained the defining feature of this period. The pattern shifted temporarily. As the night progressed, the body settled more deeply into rest. The absence of movement allowed sensation to change gradually. Some areas became less noticeable. Others remained present. The body adjusted without interruption. The return of awareness toward morning marked the end of this extended rest. The body is prepared to move again. The same conditions remained in place. The ground, the weight, and the pattern would return. The cycle continued. By the end of repeated days, night rest became part of the expected routine. It did not stand apart as a separate experience. Instead, it formed one phase within the larger cycle of movement. The body adapted to this repetition. The pattern remained stable. The difference between day and night was defined more by motion than by environment. Movement filled the day, while stillness defined the night. Both existed within the same surroundings. The body adjusted between them. The routine held. The body moved from constant motion into stillness, carrying the effects of the day into a quieter form of rest on the same ground. The rhythm paused but did not disappear, as the cycle of movement and stillness continued from one day into the next. And as this repeated, the role of marching itself would become clearer, shaping not just the body, but how each soldier understood his place within the routine. Over time, the repeated act of marching became more than a daily requirement. It shaped how soldiers experienced their own bodies and movements across long distances. The rhythm of steps, the weight carried, and the ground beneath their feet formed a consistent pattern. This pattern did not change often. The body adapted to it and continued within it. The structure of the day reinforced this pattern again and again. Movement filled most of the waking hours, with only brief pauses between long stretches of walking. The repetition made each day resemble the one before it. The body followed this structure without needing to reconsider it each time. The routine remained stable. As this repetition continued, the act of marching became familiar in a deeper way. It was no longer a task that stood apart from the rest of the day. Instead, it became the main way the body existed during that time. Movement was not added to life. It was the structure of it. The rhythm continued. The connection between the body and the road is strengthened through repetition. Feet met the ground in the same pattern across many days. The load pressed downward with each step. The body adjusted to carry both without interruption. Movement remained steady. It is notable how marching did not remain an activity separate from the soldier, but became part of how the soldier existed within the day. The identity of the soldier was shaped through this repetition of movement. The body became accustomed to long distances, a steady pace, and continuous effort. These elements defined the experience more than individual events. The routine held its form. The march continued. New soldiers often felt this structure as something imposed from the outside. The rhythm, the pace, and the repetition required attention and effort. The body had not yet aligned with them fully. Over time, this changed. The pattern became internal. Experienced soldiers moved within the march without needing to focus on each step. The body followed the rhythm automatically. The connection between movement and identity became less visible but more stable. The routine no longer required constant adjustment. The pattern held. The difference between new and experienced soldiers could be seen in how they moved. One group responded to each condition separately. The other carried all conditions together within a steady pattern. Movement appeared more even. The rhythm remained consistent. In a modern setting, identity is often shaped by roles or tasks, while here it was shaped by repeated physical movement over time. The environment remained the same for all soldiers. The ground, weather, and distance did not change based on experience. What changed was how the body moved within those conditions. The rhythm became more natural over time. The pattern continued. Marching also shaped how time was experienced. Days were not divided by many different activities. Instead, they followed a continuous line of movement. The body measured time through repetition rather than through variation. The routine remained steady. The connection between movement and memory developed as well. Repeated days created a sense of familiarity. Individual steps were not remembered, but the pattern was. The body carried this pattern forward. The march continued. Short pauses did not interrupt this identity. They were part of the same structure rather than a break from it. The body moved from walking to stillness and back again without changing its role. Movement remained central. The rhythm held. The repeated act of marching did not simply fill time, but shaped how time, movement, and the body were understood together. The weight carried during the march became part of this identity as well. It did not stand apart from movement, but existed within it. The body adapted to carry it without separate attention. Each step included both weight and motion. The pattern remained stable. The sound of marching also reinforced this identity. The steady rhythm created by many feet reflected the order of the group. The body aligned with that rhythm over time. Individual movement became part of something larger. The line continued forward. The connection between effort and routine became less noticeable with repetition. What had once required focus became expected. The body no longer treated movement as a separate task. It became part of its normal state. The rhythm continued. Even rest did not fully separate from this identity. It existed as a phase within the same cycle of movement. The body paused, then returned to the same pattern. The structure remained unchanged. The routine held. By the end of repeated marches, the distinction between activity and identity became less clear. The body did not switch between different roles. It continued within the same pattern across days. Movement defined that pattern. The march remained steady. This did not require explanation or reflection from the soldier. It developed through repetition rather than through thought. The body adapted quietly to the demands placed upon it. The rhythm became familiar. The pattern held. The shared nature of marching also shaped identity within the group. Each soldier moved within the same structure as the others. Individual variation became less visible. The group maintained a unified rhythm. Movement continued together. The repeated rhythm of steps, weight, and ground became part of how the body moved through each day, shaping identity without needing to be stated. The march continued as a steady pattern that connected time, effort, and routine into one continuous experience. And as this pattern carried forward, the body itself would continue to change quietly, adapting further without drawing attention to those changes. Over many days of repeated marching, the body began to change in ways that were not always immediately visible. These changes did not occur suddenly, but developed gradually through continuous movement over rough ground and long distances. The road, the weight, and the rhythm remained present from day to day. The body adjusted to meet these conditions without interruption. Adaptation became part of the routine itself. At first, each step required more attention from the body. Balance, pressure, and contact with the ground were more noticeable, especially on uneven roads or loose dirt. The feet responded directly to each change in surface. Over time, this response became more controlled and less reactive. Movement required less visible effort. The skin of the feet changed through repeated contact with the ground. Areas that had once been sensitive became thicker and less reactive to pressure and friction. This did not remove sensation, but it reduced how sharply it was felt. The body adapted to carry weight across longer distances. The rhythm remained steady. Muscles also adjusted to the demands of marching. Repeated motion strengthened the legs and supported continuous movement over many hours. The body learned to distribute effort more evenly across each step instead of reacting sharply to every change. This reduced sudden strain and hesitation. Movement continued without interruption. It is notable how the body changed not through sudden effort, but through steady repetition that gradually reshaped how movement was carried out. The connection between balance and movement became more stable. The body required fewer corrections to remain aligned with the line and with the ground beneath it. Each step followed a more familiar pattern than before. The feet met the road in a steadier and more controlled way. The rhythm remained consistent. The weight carried during the march became easier to manage over time. It did not become lighter, but it became more familiar to the body. The shoulders, back, and legs learned to carry it with less visible strain. Each step included the load without requiring separate attention. Movement remained steady. Breathing also adapted to the rhythm of marching. The body found a pattern that matched the pace of repeated movement and made long stretches easier to maintain. This reduced the need for sudden adjustment and uneven effort. The connection between breath and step became more stable. The pattern held. The effect of repeated conditions became less noticeable over time. The ground remained uneven, the weather continued to shift, and the load stayed present. The body responded to these factors with less visible reaction than before. Adaptation reduced their immediate effect on movement. The line continued in the same form. In a modern setting, adaptation is often supported by controlled training and recovery, while here it developed through continuous exposure inside the activity itself. New soldiers had not yet experienced these changes. Their bodies responded more directly to each condition, and small differences in surface or weight stood out more clearly. The road felt sharper, the load felt heavier, and long movement demanded more attention. Their steps showed more adjustment. Over time, this began to change. Experienced soldiers moved with fewer visible signs of strain. Their steps remained even across stone, dirt, heat, and repeated distance. The body had adapted to carry both movement and weight together without much outward change. This created a more stable pattern that could be seen from a distance. The rhythm continued. The process of adaptation did not remove all difficulty from the march. It reduced how strongly that difficulty affected the body's visible response. The road could still be rough, and the feet could still feel pressure, heat, and soreness. The difference was in how the body carried these things. The march continued without breaking its pattern. There was no clear moment when adaptation was complete. It developed gradually across repeated days, with no single step marking the change. Each day, I added something small to the process. The body adjusted without needing to announce it. Movement remained consistent. The body did not become free from the conditions of the march, but it became better at carrying them without breaking the rhythm. The environment continued to shape how adaptation occurred. Rough surfaces, changing weather, carried weight, and repeated effort all played a role in the body's response. Adaptation was not separate from these conditions, but formed within them. The same road that created strain also shaped the body's adjustment to strain. The pattern of movement remained the same. Short periods of rest did not reverse these changes. The body returned to movement with the same adjustments already in place. Thickened skin, steadier balance, and quieter reactions remained part of each step. Adaptation stayed with the body from one day into the next. The rhythm continued without change. The connection between movement and adaptation became stronger over time. The body no longer needed to react separately to each detail underfoot. Instead, it followed the rhythm more directly and with less interruption. This reduced variation in movement across long stretches. The march remained steady. The effect of adaptation extended across the body as a whole. Feet, ankles, knees, posture, breathing, and the way weight was carried all adjusted together. These changes supported one another rather than working separately. The pattern of movement became more efficient and more even. The rhythm remained stable. By the end of repeated marches, adaptation was no longer noticeable as a separate process. It had become part of the body's normal state during movement. The same road could still be hard, but the body no longer answered it in the same early way. Motion felt more settled across different conditions. The pattern remained unchanged. The gradual nature of this change made it difficult to observe in a single moment. It became clearer only when earlier experience was compared with the later movement. The body carried the result of many repeated steps without needing to describe them. Adaptation remained quiet because it developed through ordinary repetition. The routine held. This quiet change also altered how the soldier existed within the march. The body no longer treated each part of the day as a new challenge in the same way. Instead, it entered the familiar pattern and continued through it with less visible effort. What had once required more attention became part of the background of movement. The line held its shape. The connection between adaptation and routine reflected the structure of the march itself. Both depended on repetition rather than variation, and both became stronger through being repeated again and again. The body adjusted to fit that structure more closely over time. Movement continued within it without needing special explanation. The rhythm remained steady. The body changed slowly through repeated movement, adapting to ground, weight, weather, and rhythm without drawing attention to the process itself. Each step became more stable as these changes settled quietly into place, allowing the road to be carried with less reaction from the body than before. And as this continued, the sense of an ending would grow less clear, because one day of marching could begin to feel like only another stretch in a pattern that never fully stopped. Across many days of repeated movement, the structure of marching no longer appeared as a series of separate events. One day followed another without a clear boundary between them. The same rhythm continued from morning into evening and then returned. The body moved through this pattern without needing to reset. The march extended across time. The beginning of each day did not feel entirely new. The same ground, the same weight, and the same rhythm returned. The body resumed movement within familiar conditions. There was no need to relearn the pattern. The routine continued from where it had paused. Steps taken on one day blended into those taken on the next. The body carried the memory of movement without needing to recall each part. The rhythm remained consistent across different stretches of time. The pattern continued without interruption. Movement remained steady. The environment changed in small ways, but the structure of the march stayed the same. Weather, light, and terrain varied from day to day. These changes did not alter the underlying pattern. The body adapted within the same rhythm. The line moved forward. It is notable how the march did not present a clear ending, but continued as a repeated pattern that carried from one day into the next. The absence of a clear ending shaped how the body experienced time. Movement did not build toward a single final point. Instead, it extended forward without a defined conclusion. The body adjusted to this continuity. The rhythm remained stable. Resting at night did not create a full separation from the march. It provided a pause within the same structure rather than a complete break. The body stopped and then resumed the same pattern. The cycle continued. Movement returned in the same form. The feet carried the record of this repetition. Each step adds to the condition of the body over time. There was no single moment that defined the experience. Instead, many small moments formed a continuous pattern. The march remained steady. The weight carried each day did not disappear with rest. It returned as part of the same routine. The body adjusted to receive it again without hesitation. Movement continued within familiar conditions. The rhythm held. In a modern setting, activities often have clear beginnings and endings, while here, movement is extended without a distinct conclusion. New soldiers often looked for a sense of completion in the early stages. The expectation of a defined end to movement did not always match the structure of the march. Over time, this expectation changed. The body adjusted to continuation rather than conclusion. Experienced soldiers moved within this continuity without needing to define it. The absence of a clear ending did not affect the rhythm of their steps. The body followed the pattern as it appeared. Movement remained steady across days. The connection between movement and routine became more complete. Marching was no longer one part of the day among others. It became the central structure that shaped the day itself. The body existed within it. The pattern continued. Short pauses did not interrupt this continuity. They existed within the same cycle as movement. The body shifted between motion and stillness without breaking the pattern. The rhythm remained present. The march continued. The march did not end in a clear moment, but continued as a steady sequence that shaped how time was experienced. The environment did not provide a final signal for completion. Roads extended forward, and the line followed them. Each step led to another without a defined stopping point. The body adapted to this ongoing movement. The rhythm remained unchanged. The repetition of days created a sense of familiarity. The body is no longer treated each day as separate from the last. Instead, it continued within the same pattern. Movement remained consistent. The routine held. The connection between body and rhythm became stable across time. The feet met the ground in the same way across many days. The load remained present with each step. The body adapted to carry both without interruption. The pattern continued, even as conditions changed slightly. The structure remained constant. Heat, cold, and terrain shifted. But the rhythm of movement stayed the same. The body adjusted to these variations within the pattern. Movement continued forward. By the end of repeated marches, the idea of an ending became less important than the continuation itself. The body did not move toward a final point. It moved within a pattern that extended across time. The rhythm remained steady. The march continued. The absence of a clear ending did not create confusion. Instead, it became part of the routine. The body adapted to this structure without needing to define it. Movement remained consistent across days. The pattern held. The shared nature of the march reinforced this continuity. Each soldier moved within the same rhythm as the others. The group followed the same pattern across distance and time. Individual steps blended into a larger sequence. The line continued forward. The march carried forward without a clear ending, extending across days as a steady pattern of movement, rest, and return to movement again. The body adapted to this continuity, moving within it without needing to mark where one day ended and another began. And as this pattern settled into place, the experience remained quiet and steady, continuing in the same rhythm as the road stretched onward. Thank you for staying with this slow and steady journey through the quiet details of the past. Good night, and may your rest be calm and uninterrupted.